The day I left my hometown is one I'll never forget. It was a brisk autumn morning, the kind where the crisp air carries the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Everything I owned was packed into my old, battered pickup truck, and I was determined. It was time for a fresh start. Staying was unbearable after the betrayal I'd suffered. Moving on was my only option. The lies and deceit had shattered my life, and putting miles between me and those who caused it felt like the only way to heal. After hours of driving, I found myself in a quiet, unassuming little town that seemed like it had been waiting for me. The slower pace of life and the genuine warmth of the locals drew me in immediately. As I wandered through the town, I stumbled across an old, run-down gas station and garage that had been sitting empty for years. It looked forgotten, but I could see its potential. I made a low offer on the place, thinking it was a long shot, but to my surprise it was accepted. That dilapidated property became the foundation of my new life, a place to rebuild from scratch. One Saturday evening, I found myself in a cozy corner of the local tavern, savoring the rare peace that had become my new normal. That tavern was like a sanctuary, a place where I could let my guard down and reflect. Early on, I'd snagged the gas station and repair shop for a steal. The previous owner was desperate to sell after it had sat vacant for 2 years. Where others saw a dead-end business, I saw opportunity. My first big idea was to add a small retail store next to the gas station. The town's only grocery store closed early, and I figured the locals could use a late-night spot to grab essentials. I reoriented the fuel pumps to face the new store, making plenty of room for parking. Before long, the store was buzzing, especially late at night. We stayed open 24/7, and the busiest hours were between 7 p.m. and midnight. Meanwhile, the garage stuck to regular hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, with Saturdays reserved for bigger projects. At first, the bar down the street wasn't thrilled when I started selling liquor, but once the jobs and extra revenue came rolling in, they warmed up to the idea. I restructured the store's layout and added better merchandising, and soon, business was booming. One of the smartest decisions I made was hiring a sharp, reliable woman to help manage the place. She turned out to be critical to our success. Before I knew it, we'd paid off the equity loan and even had to double the staff to handle the weekend rush. On Fridays and Saturdays, we sold mountains of snacks to bargoers, and Sundays brought in customers looking for cold beer at unbeatable prices. That particular Saturday, I was nursing a double Jack Daniels on the rocks. Just a splash of water and a wedge of lemon. I just wrapped up an 8-month project restoring a vintage truck for one of my regulars. It was a family heirloom, and when I handed it back to him, he swore. He'd laughed when I handed over the keys, swearing he'd drive that vintage truck to his last breath, even joking about being buried in it. From 4 to 7 p.m., the bar hit its sweet spot, quiet enough for some genuine relaxation before the evening crowd spilled in. The regulars, mostly local farmers, often came with their daughters for some post-dinner fun. Over my 6.5 years in town, I'd built a solid reputation and a network of true friendships. This community had a way of watching out for one another, always keeping an eye out for anything that didn't sit right. Every Saturday, I stuck to a simple routine: one drink at the tavern before heading home. But that night, my peace was shattered the moment they walked in. My stomach twisted. The woman was my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man beside her was the boy I'd once believed was my son. The memories I'd worked so hard to bury came rushing back. Living under the same roof as them had blinded me to their true nature. Now, seeing the boy grown and the spitting image of his biological father was a cruel reminder of the betrayal that had gutted me. What could they possibly want now? I stayed frozen in my seat, watching as they spoke to the bartender, showed him a photo, and left shortly after. A wave of relief swept over me. My long scruffy hair, beard, and slimmer frame must have rendered me unrecognizable. As the door closed behind them, I discreetly texted a friend, "Come home when I can." About half an hour later, Tom, the bartender, wandered over to my table, a cautious look on his face. "What did they want, Tom?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Tom hesitated. Said a woman named Lena is dying of cancer and wants to make amends. They heard you might live here and wanted to confirm the rumor. Asked for your picture, but I acted like I didn't recognize the name. I lit a cigarette, tearing off the filter before taking a long drag. The woman is my ex's twin sister. The boy's the child my ex swore was mine for years. You think they're telling the truth? Tom frowned, considering. There's some truth in what they said, but they're hiding something big. I nodded. Deception was always their specialty, pretending to be sincere while driving the knife deeper. As Tom returned to the bar, my mind drifted back nearly 7 years, to the day I walked away from it all. They never believed I'd go through with it, mocking me as I packed my things and left. To them, I was just blowing off steam, too angry over some petty argument to be taken seriously. What they didn't realize was I'd uncovered the truth, that our youngest child wasn't mine, but my brother-in-law's. That revelation was the final straw. A family friend, fed up with the twins' games, had handed me the damning evidence I needed. She called them black witches who thrived on scheming and manipulation. That same week, I'd stumbled across a new insurance policy they'd secretly taken out on me. A $4 million payout for accidental death. A trusted confidant, a wise older woman, had urged me to leave immediately. They're up to something dangerous, she warned. My work truck was already packed. My truck was already packed with the essentials, so I drove off without a backward glance, determined to leave the chaos behind. 2 states away, I started over. I'd be lying if I said I didn't blame myself for some of it. Lena got pregnant young, and at 18, I caved to the relentless family pressure and married her. In no time, we had 2 more kids, locking us into a life I wasn't ready for. To Lena, though, it was all a game. After I left, she told our daughters, "Your father will come back when he regains his sense of humor." But her smirk didn't last long. The moment a sheriff knocked on her door and handed her divorce papers, her amusement vanished. "Are you Mrs. Lena Frost?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, still smiling. "Then you've been served," he said, holding out the envelope. Her grin faded as reality set in. I'd dissolved our marriage without a moment's hesitation. My attorney had been thorough, documenting every asset, every debt, and the damning DNA results that confirmed Lena's year-long affair. The divorce petition didn't hold back. Receipts, photos from their hotel rendezvous, and other incriminating evidence were all there. To top it off, the envelope included a letter stating I was suing her husband for child support, infidelity, and defamation. For the first time, their smug laughter was silenced. The joke wasn't on me anymore. I finally had the last laugh. For years, Lena and her sister had treated me like a personal ATM, convinced I had the Midas touch and everything I worked on would turn to gold. Lena and the kids lived in luxury, enjoying the fruits of my labor without lifting a finger. But before I left, I flipped the script. Quietly, I sold 3 of our businesses, paid off every cent of debt, and offloaded 2 apartment buildings at a profit. I canceled every credit card, pulled my name off our joint accounts, and even signed over my share of the house to her. Half of our total net worth was now liquid cash in my pocket. Overnight, her monthly income of $10,000 dropped to 0. Did Lena and her sister, Nina, ever understand the price of trying to use me? I doubt it. My attorney froze their assets before serving the subpoena, leaving them high and dry. Still, when the dust settled, my lawyer handed Lena a quarter of the losses as reimbursement. When she demanded to know why, he simply said, "This was never about the money. It's about principle. I hope this helps you start fresh and learn from your mistakes." But Lena, she refused to finalize the divorce without speaking to me first. That left us legally separated but technically still married, and I had 0 interest in talking to the woman who'd lied to my face for years. Forced to fend for herself for the first time, Lena quickly learned how fast money disappears when there's no steady income. I took precautions. All my important mail was forwarded to a rented FedEx mailbox, which was then forwarded to my work address every week. I knew Lena and Nina too well. They were masters of manipulation and would pull any trick to track me down. Revenge was never a question of if, only when. Lena and her family were notorious for holding grudges, and my vanishing act had probably added fuel to their simmering anger. The longer I stayed out of their reach, the harsher their eventual retaliation was likely to be. Seeing Nina walk into the tavern made one thing painfully clear. Their game wasn't over. After finishing my drink, I quietly slipped out the back door, avoiding the front in case they were lurking. I cut through the empty lot behind the tavern and circled around to my pickup truck. Just as I unlocked the door, a man stepped out of the shadows. "You're a hard man to find." "Lucas John Frost, I presume," he said. "How do you know that name?" I asked, my voice cold and cautious. "My name's Mark Collins. I'm married to your oldest daughter, Emma," he replied. "That could be a blessing or a curse," I said dryly. "Does she act like her mother?" He gave a faint smile. "Why I'm here has nothing to do with her. Some things need sorting out. It would have been easier if your mother-in-law had just signed the divorce papers," I said bluntly. Mark's expression shifted to surprise. "What divorce papers?" "Follow me," I replied. We drove through town and down a long driveway to a farmhouse that served as my home base. Inside my office, I pulled out the divorce papers and let him make copies. Mark didn't need to know the house wasn't mine. I'd built it years ago for a family matriarch, hoping she'd move from her old home. Mark seemed confident and well-educated, but I couldn't shake the possibility that he was part of one of Lena and Nina's schemes. As he connected to my Wi-Fi and began downloading files to his laptop, I watched his expression change. He was processing information that didn't line up with what he'd been told. At one point, he printed a letter from Lena's attorney to mine. It acknowledged the agreed-upon property division but stated that Lena refused to finalize the divorce without an in-person meeting. "Do you think Emma knows the truth?" Mark asked, his tone uncertain. "That's something you'll have to ask her yourself," I replied. "But here's a question for you. Does Lena really have cancer?" "Who told you that?" Mark asked, frowning. "Nina and John told the bartender earlier today," I said, my voice hardening. "But it's a lie. Lena's perfectly fine. She's living in a common-law marriage with her former attorney and is pregnant with his second child." Mark sighed, shaking his head. "She's the one who sent me to find you. She claims the divorce needs to be finalized so she can remarry." Without a word, Mark pulled out his phone and called Emma, putting her on speaker so I could hear. "Did you know your mother lied about the divorce not being finalized?" he asked her. "What are you talking about?" Emma replied, confusion clear in her voice. "Mom told us Dad abandoned us, drained everything, and disappeared. If it weren't for our stepdad, we wouldn't have made it," she said, her tone defensive. Mark's jaw tightened. "I'm sending you the legal documents right now," he said as he worked. "Read it and call me back," Mark said to Emma before ending the call. While he spoke, I grabbed 2 beers, popped the tops, and handed one to him. "Why didn't you tell Emma you found me?" I asked, watching him closely. Mark took a long sip before answering. "Emma and I have only been married 2 years, and we just had a baby 3 months ago. For now, I'd rather keep this to myself. Everyone else thinks I'm working on an unrelated investigation." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "Paradise Police Department," it read. The badge looked legitimate, but I didn't take his word for it. A quick check on their official website confirmed his identity. "So, what led you to me?" I asked, still cautious. "It started with an accident report from a few months back," Mark explained. "Emma filed a missing persons report for you, and it eventually ended up on my desk. While looking into it, I cross-referenced the report with an insurance claim that had ruled in your favor. The paper trail led me here. And you still didn't tell Emma?" Pressed. Mark hesitated. "After reviewing your file, it became clear there was a lot more to this. For example, what happened to the $250,000 in cash Lena was supposed to get along with the house? And why is everyone lying about what really happened? Sounds like you've been fed just as many lies as I have," I said with a bitter edge. Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "It's Emma," he said, raising a finger to signal for quiet. Putting the call on speaker, he answered, "Hi, honey." Emma's voice came through, tense and trembling. "Where did you get all this? Is it true? Have we been lied to all these years? Johan doesn't even know who he really is, and neither do I. My sister Grace is going to lose it." She always defended Dad and stopped speaking to Mom because of all this. Now it contradicts everything we were told growing up. Emma's voice grew more frustrated as she continued. Mom and Aunt Nina gave Dad no choice. They've been manipulating his life for years. And now, I find out the divorce isn't finalized because Mom refuses to sign? What's really going on here? It's true, Mark said, keeping his voice steady. I got the details from your dad's lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to track her down. Turns out, her husband kept duplicates of all the records, including the divorce petition. And, Emma, your mom was served with it on the very day your dad left. I scribbled a note and slid it to Mark. Tell her to talk to her great-aunt Mabel. Assuming she's still alive, it read. Mark nodded and relayed the message. Emma, your dad suggests talking to your great-aunt Mabel if she's still around. She might have more answers. It's crucial we find my father, Emma said, her voice firm. He deserves to finally be free from Mom and all her schemes. Why won't she finalize the divorce? And what happened to the money she got? If she owned the house outright, why did she have to sell it? Now I hear she's planning to sue Dad for desertion. None of this makes sense. I'll talk to Aunt Mabel, Mark assured her. In the meantime, ask your sister to watch our son for a little longer. This needs to stay between us for now. He ended the call and sighed, running a hand through his hair. Looks like I had promised myself I'd never let the past creep back in. Never let it taint the life I'd fought so hard to build. But now, it felt like the storm I'd outrun for years was finally catching up to me. Sitting at the dinner table, I watched Hannah's face as I told her about Mark, his questions, and the shocking realization that Lena and her schemes hadn't been buried with my old life. Her brows furrowed as she listened, her hand gripping mine under the table. She knew what this meant. What do you think they're really after? She asked, her voice low to keep the kids from overhearing. Money, power, control. It's always the same with them, I replied, shaking my head. Mark's digging into things, but if what I'm hearing is true, they've been lying and stealing on a level I never imagined. And now it seems like they're desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. Hannah's jaw tightened. You've worked too hard to get away from them. You're not going back. I don't want to, I admitted. But they might not give me a choice. The kids, oblivious to the weight of our conversation, laughed as they played with their forks. Their innocence reminded me of why I left in the first place, so they wouldn't grow up in the shadow of manipulation and betrayal. I couldn't let Lena and Nina claw their way back into my life. Not now, not ever. Later that night, after the kids were tucked in and the house had gone quiet, I sat on the porch, staring into the darkness. My mind raced. The thought of Mark's questions, the missing money, and Lena's refusal to sign the divorce papers left me restless. Why was she holding on? Was it guilt, spite, or something worse? Hannah stepped out onto the porch, her presence grounding me. She sat beside me, resting her hand on my knee. You've been through hell, Lucas, she said softly. You don't owe them anything. Not your time, not your peace, and definitely not your energy. I nodded, but my jaw clenched. What if it's not just about me anymore? What if they go after Mark or Emma, or even our kids? They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want. That's the only thing I know for sure. Hannah leaned closer, her voice firm. Then we fight back. Together. They don't scare me, and they sure as hell don't scare you. I met her gaze, seeing the fire in her eyes. She was right, we had built something strong, something worth protecting. If Lena and Nina wanted to drag me back into their twisted web, they'd have to face a version of me they weren't ready for. Let them come, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm not the man they remember. This time, I'll be ready. Grandma Mabel had always been a cornerstone in my life, a steady presence when everything else felt chaotic. I'd promised her I'd always stay in touch, and I had honored that promise without fail. Every Sunday we'd talk. About a year and a half ago, though, one of those calls came with a request for help. Her granddaughter Hannah, 10 years younger than me and stuck in a toxic marriage, needed a way out. She was living on an army base in another state, childless, and desperate for a fresh start. I didn't know much about her, but Mabel had always been there for me, so I didn't hesitate. Within a week, I secured a partially furnished two-bedroom apartment for Hannah in a small, quiet town, thanks to a friend's help. When I arrived to pick her up, she was ready. She'd quit her job, emptied her bank account, and packed her belongings. Her husband was away on his final 2-week training exercise before enlisting in the army, giving us just enough time. Quietly, with the help of a few friends, we loaded her things into a rented U-Haul. By midnight, we were on the road, gone before anyone could notice. For safety reasons, I didn't tell her where I was from. During the long drive, we started to get to know each other. Late into the night, Mabel called her to check in. Hannah laughed as she said, "Yes, Grandma. Luke picked me up, but you could have warned me. He looks like some wild bushman, though I guess he might clean up okay if he tried." The next day, Mabel contacted Hannah's attorney, forwarding all her legal documents to my FedEx mailbox for safekeeping. Hannah warned me her soon-to-be ex-husband might cause trouble, so I took precautions to protect her. Once settled, Hannah took over managing my store, and it didn't take long for her to prove she was a natural. Her knack for organization, her charm, and her focus on customer service brought in new clients and created a harmonious atmosphere that boosted business. Meanwhile, her ex didn't go quietly. Dishonorably discharged, he returned to my old hometown, probably assuming she'd be there. Mabel had already helped Hannah secure a restraining order, but we stayed cautious. To avoid unwanted attention, Hannah wore a diamond ring that made people assume we were engaged. When asked about it, she'd smirk and say, "I'm sure you'll figure it out," which only fueled gossip, including wild rumors that she might have been a mail-order bride. As time passed, Hannah and I grew closer. She had a way of grounding me, often bringing me lunch on Saturdays when I got too wrapped up in work to remember to eat. Her care and kindness came naturally, and before long, so did our relationship. Everyone in town assumed we were a couple, and honestly, they weren't wrong. Mabel kept me updated on everything happening back in paradise. It wasn't long before we learned that Hannah's ex had grown close to Nina. That piece of news hit hard, solidifying the bond between Hannah and me even more as we prepared for whatever might come next. We celebrated our growing relationship one memorable evening at the local bar, surrounded by friends under the dim, warm lights. As the music slowed, Hannah and I shared our first kiss on the dance floor. It wasn't planned, but in that moment, nothing had ever felt more right. 6 months after that memorable dance, Hannah and I took a big step and moved in together. That night, while the kids were splashing around in the bathtub, I decided it was time for a change. Grabbing the shaving kit Hannah had given me for Christmas, I started lathering up my face with the old-fashioned bowl and brush. The kids were transfixed, their wide eyes watching every move as I shaved off my beard and mustache, leaving just a shadow of stubble. I couldn't resist playfully soaping up their little faces too, making them giggle uncontrollably. Laughter echoed in the small bathroom, bouncing off the tiles like music. Hannah walked in, her expression a mix of surprise and amusement. "Looks like Daddy could look like you with a clean face," she teased, a mischievous glint in her eye. Then she added, "Should I cut his hair too?" Both toddlers squealed. "Yes." I laughed, shaking my head. "I think I'll let the barber handle that on Monday." "Oh no," Hannah said firmly, grinning. "I'm doing it myself before you change your mind." She dried the kids off, got them into their pajamas, and settled them at the kitchen table with a snack while she got to work. By the time she finished trimming my hair, I barely recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. "You did a great job," I told her, brushing loose hairs from my shoulders. She smiled, proud of her handiwork, and sent me to shower off while she cleaned up the mess. As I rinsed, I heard her phone buzz in the next room. It was Grandma Mabel, calling to let her know that Emma had just left her house. Hannah believed her grandmother was finally ready to confront the family. Emma had uncovered that the $600 monthly annuities I'd set up for each of my children had mysteriously never reached them. This revelation added another layer to the tangled web of deceit spun by Lena and Nina. The next week, I became the talk of the town. Not for the lawsuit I was about to face, but for my new look. Friends and neighbors couldn't resist cracking jokes. "Did Hannah blackmail you into joining polite society?" one asked. Hannah played along, laughing. He promised to bathe at least 3 times a week now. Most folks got the joke, but a few didn't. It was eye-opening to see how people's attitudes shifted when they thought someone had changed, even if it was just on the surface. But beneath the humor, trouble was brewing. A local source informed me that Lena had filed a civil suit against me for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. The absurdity of it made Hannah and me laugh. We joked about a collection agency trying to track me down when I had receipts for everything I'd provided. Even the mailman delivering the court notice found it ridiculous, shaking his head with a chuckle. The situation quickly spiraled into something much larger. The district attorney and the postmaster's office had hired an attorney on my behalf, using the case as part of a broader investigation into Lena and Nina's activities. Mark later estimated that the two had stolen over $48,000 from my children's annuities. Even more chilling, the DA had reopened the investigation into my former attorney's sudden death. It was now suspected to be linked to arson and possibly manslaughter. The pieces were falling into place for a case that could result in Lena and Nina facing 7 to 10 years in prison. Meanwhile, Lena's new partner, her common-law husband, was being drawn into the investigation as well. The revelations were staggering, but for the first time in years, I felt like the tide was turning in my favor. Hannah and I prepared for the storm ahead, but through it all, I clung to the laughter of my kids, the warmth of my home, and the quiet strength of the woman by my side. Lena's common-law husband, her former attorney, was in hot water. He was facing disbarment as the allegations piled up against him. The attorney hired to represent me worked tirelessly, not only helping to keep my location secret, but also strengthening the case against Lena and Nina. For a few weeks, Hannah and I enjoyed a rare, peaceful lull, but it didn't last. One Sunday night, Mabel called with urgent news. She warned us that significant paperwork was being filed the following morning. Over the years, she'd quietly gathered a mountain of evidence, from notarized statements to videotaped conversations and the names of attorneys willing to support a countersuit. One detail she shared caught my attention immediately. A $2 million accidental death insurance policy Lena had taken out just 6 months before I left. The timing was too perfect, and it reeked of a setup. Hannah and I spent the rest of the night scanning and forwarding all the documents to the DA's office. We were convinced this was a scheme to lure me back into Lena's clutches, or worse. By morning, Hannah had selected one of the recommended attorneys, forwarded them the information, and sent a retainer to get started. By Friday, Lena and Nina were served with a countersuit. That same day, Hannah called me with surprising news. "Mabel's on her way," she said, excitement laced with concern. "She's bringing guests. They left Thursday night and stayed at a hotel, but they'll be here soon." We decided to close the store for the weekend and focus on family. Around 7 p.m., headlights appeared in the driveway. A Ford Explorer and an Escape parked side by side. 4 adults stepped out, and as I glanced through the window, Hannah noticed the tension in my posture. She took my hand, squeezing it reassuringly. My truck was hidden in the garage, so no one knew I was there yet. "Who's that with Mabel?" Hannah asked. I took a deep breath. "That's Mark, his wife Emma holding their baby, and Grace, my second oldest daughter. Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. Hannah, holding our youngest child, opened the front door, and we all stepped outside to greet them. The moment Grace saw me, she burst into tears. I handed my son to Mabel and wrapped Grace in a tight embrace, years of separation dissolving in that moment. Emma passed her baby to Mark and joined us, her own emotions spilling over. My daughters had grown into beautiful young women, and seeing them standing there together was unforgettable. "It's good to see you again, Mark," I said, shaking his hand firmly. After introductions, we sat down to a lavish dinner Hannah had prepared. Tender beef shoulder, mashed potatoes with gravy, scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and hot apple pie for dessert. It was a feast, and the warmth of family filled the air. Once the kids were settled for the evening, the adults sat down for a serious conversation. "First off, Luke," Mark began cautiously, "is it okay if I call you Dad?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Of course, Mark took a breath before continuing. Then, Dad, the DA has reason to believe Hannah's ex-husband's car may have been involved in your lawyer's accident. They're running a paint comparison against the car's current owner. If it matches, your lawyer's death could lead to manslaughter charges. I clenched my fists, a cold rage boiling beneath the surface as Mark explained further. The fire that destroyed his office the same night is now being treated as arson. They've even found video footage with Hannah's ex in the background. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Whatever game Lena and Nina had been playing, it was unraveling faster than anyone could have anticipated. I glanced at Hannah, her jaw tight but her eyes determined. Mark continued, his tone grave. This could be the break we've been waiting for. If this evidence holds up, it's not just fraud anymore. We're looking at arson, manslaughter, and a conspiracy that's about to blow wide open. Lena and her attorneys sealed the divorce papers, Mark said grimly. They think they've erased any proof of the property agreements. This week, they've already filed a lawsuit against you. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I always thought you were being overprotective when you moved me here, she said, her voice trembling. But now I get it, all those questions you asked my grandmother, the lengths you went to. I see now why you needed to know exactly who we were dealing with. Mabel interjected, her voice steady but concerned. Lena and Nina must have realized I was in contact with you, Lucas. That's why we came so quickly. We were afraid they'd retaliate. Hannah turned to Mabel, placing a comforting hand on her arm. Grandma, your house is ready. It's furnished and waiting for you. You'll only need to bring your clothes. I packed most of what I need in the car, Mabel replied. Emma will ship the rest, including the antiques. I've already given her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It's time for me to leave Paradise for good. I'll drive back with Mark and Emma, I said. I'll rent a truck and haul everything out. Mark looked puzzled. What suspicions are we talking about? The lawsuit against me is just bait to lure me out, I explained. The $2 million accidental death insurance policy is the smoking gun. My former attorney's death? That was their test run. Mark, Emma, Grace, and Mabel went pale as the realization hit. They were planning to kill you, Dad, Emma said softly. You knew, didn't you? Even before you left town. I had my suspicions, I replied, giving a faint, wry smile. Even my lawyer didn't believe me at first, but in the end, he experienced the truth firsthand. Mark excused himself to make some important calls, leaving me, my daughters, and Hannah a moment to catch up. Hannah pulled out some old photos of me from when we first met, and both Emma and Grace admitted they wouldn't have recognized me now, even if they'd passed me on the street. When Mark returned, the room fell silent as he delivered his update. Lena will be taken into custody after the holiday, he said. We can hold her for 48 hours before formally charging her with 3 counts of theft for stealing from the children's annuities. That'll slow the process down and ensure she doesn't get a bond hearing right away. Then he turned to me. Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul and start visiting a few old places, it'll stir up enough attention. Tell anyone who asks that you're packing up Mabel's things to help her move. That'll force Lena to act. She'll have to communicate from jail, and we'll have the opportunity to intercept her plans. Emma frowned, narrowing her eyes at Mark. Are you seriously using my father as bait to lure out my cousins? What guarantee do I have that he won't be targeted? Mark met her glare, his tone calm but firm. We'll have police protection for him at Mabel's house until this is over. The DA has already confirmed his suspicions. This is the best way to keep the upper hand and make sure Lena and Nina don't slip through the cracks. I rested a hand on Emma's shoulder. It's okay, I said gently. This isn't my first time dealing with their schemes. Besides, if it helps end this nightmare for good, it's worth it. Emma's face softened, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. I trust you, Dad. Just be careful. I met Hannah's gaze, and she understood immediately. Damn it, she muttered under her breath. You'd do it without hesitation, wouldn't you? No matter what I think. Hannah always understood me better than I understood myself. Hannah. Luke's always been like that, Mabel interjected, her voice tinged with pride. It's why I called him to help you escape your ex. Luke never asks anyone to do what he wouldn't do himself. He's determined to get rid of Lena and Nina for good. Hannah tried to smile but couldn't mask the worry in her eyes. My only fear is that he'll end up walking straight into danger. If Luke were a boxer, he'd be a world title holder, Mabel added with a chuckle. He's quick on his feet and always thinks 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Lena and Nina have no idea he's already 1 step ahead. Relax, ladies, I said, trying to ease their nerves. I'll be in Mark's capable hands. Besides, if anything happens to me, he'll have to answer to Emma. Mark nodded knowingly, fully aware of the risks. Later that evening, while the women stayed in the living room chatting, Mark and I moved to a quieter spot to talk in private. The DA thinks Hannah's ex will make his move once he knows you're in town, Mark said. He's going to be furious when he finds out you were the one who helped Hannah escape her abusive marriage. What happens if he's caught in the act? I asked. Would he confess to save himself? Mark considered this. With his military background, he's always taken responsibility when caught. He's a follower, not a leader. Lena and Nina manipulate him because he's so easy to control. But if cornered, I'd bet he'll spill everything. As I drove into Paradise later that week, a large sign greeted me. Welcome to the City of Refuge. Population 34,800. The irony of the town's nickname wasn't lost on me. Its so-called refuge had always depended on who you were and who you knew. Justice here bent to the whims of those in power, favoring the elites while everyone else got left in the dust. It felt like stepping back into the Wild West, where progressivism was just another word for selective enforcement. The town itself hadn't changed much in 7 years. Main Street had a fresh coat of asphalt, but the storefronts looked exactly as I remembered them. Some were thriving, others fading, but the atmosphere was the same. A place stuck in time, pretending to evolve. My first stop was Bob and Betty's Barbecue Bar, a haunt I knew well. To my surprise, it was still standing. Its facade had been freshly painted, but otherwise it looked untouched. I pulled the U-Haul into the parking lot, stepped out, and walked through the entrance just before the lunch rush. If I was going to get Lena's attention, I needed word of my return to spread fast. I took a seat, picked up the menu, and noticed a few people glancing my way, their eyes darting to their phones as they discreetly typed. Just what I needed, rumors to start flying. A server approached me with a warm smile. Ready to order? She asked. I looked up and grinned. Is the Wednesday special of meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes still on? Her smile faltered, and she blinked in surprise. How do you know about that? She asked cautiously. I leaned back in my seat, keeping my tone casual. Let's just say I've been here before. It's not on the menu for regulars, I said with a knowing grin. But tell Sam that Luke wants brown gravy and fried onions on the meatloaf. The server stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Never mind, I added with a laugh, waving her off. I'll tell him myself. Ignoring her protests, I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The familiar sounds and smells of the grill filled the air. Sam, the son of the original owner, turned around, his face lighting up as soon as he saw me. You dumbass, he said, breaking into a hearty laugh. You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend. Sam hadn't changed a bit. He was just as sharp and good-natured as I remembered. He gestured to a staff member, telling them to bring my coffee into the kitchen so we could catch up. Over the next hour, we reminisced about the good old days and talked about the changes in town. But eventually, Sam's tone shifted, and he leaned in, his voice dropping. Luke, you should know. My wife ended her friendship with Lena and Nina not long after you left. She couldn't stand what they were doing to you and the kids. I nodded, lowering my own voice. Sam, a lot is about to happen. If everything goes according to plan, this town's going to see some fireworks. Emma's husband, Mark, is working with me. That's why I'm back. Sam's face grew serious. Mark's a damn big cop, he said. He put 2 city council members in jail last year for corruption. But we'll talk more later. Too many big ears around here. Just then, a car pulled into the parking lot. My little sister, Sophia, stepped out, She had grown up a lot since I'd seen her, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. I stayed seated, knowing she'd spot me as soon as she walked in. When her gaze fell on me, her expression shifted from shock to relief. She hurried through the kitchen doors, flustered. "What's going on?" she asked Sam, her voice sharp. "It's important," Sam said simply, stepping back to let her through. When she came closer, I stood up and turned to her. Sophia froze for a moment before throwing her arms around me. I hugged her tightly, holding her as though no time had passed. After a few minutes, she pulled back, wiping tears from her face. Sam ushered the rest of the kitchen staff out, giving us some privacy. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sophia asked, her voice still unsteady. "No," I said, "and let's keep it that way for a few days. Are you here because Lena was taken into custody last night?" she asked as we walked toward my rental truck. "Yes," I replied, "and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Once I settle in, I'll be under police protection. They've reopened the investigation into my former lawyer's death, suspecting it's connected to the arson that destroyed his office." Sam and Sophia exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions saying more than words ever could. The district attorney, appointed 3 years ago, had a reputation for reopening cold cases and digging into long-buried secrets. "You're being used as bait to draw someone out, aren't you?" Sam asked quietly. I nodded. "If everything goes as expected, the arson, insurance fraud, and several other crimes will be exposed in the next few days. This whole thing," I paused, looking at my sister and my old friend. "It's bigger than any of us realized. This whole situation was orchestrated to force me back to this city," I said grimly. "Lena's arrest and my sudden return are throwing a wrench into a carefully planned conspiracy." "What's behind all this?" Sam asked, his tone low. "A $2 million insurance policy," I replied flatly. "Double indemnity, payable on accidental death. And guess who it's insured on?" Sophia's face hardened as she processed the information. "They insured you?" We kept chatting as we made our way to my truck. Suddenly, Sophia leaned in close and whispered. Nina just pulled up beside us. I didn't flinch. "I'm staying at Mabel's old house," I said evenly. "I'm moving her things to a new place." She wanted to be far away from whatever's about to happen. "Why did Mabel leave town?" Sophia asked, her voice curious but wary. "She wanted to be near Hannah and her boys," I said, a smile breaking through the tension. "Hannah and I have been together for over 5 years now. We've got 2 sons, 3 and 4 years old." Sophia stopped in her tracks, clearly stunned. "Wait, you and Hannah? How did that even happen?" "Mabel and I stayed in touch all these years," I explained. "When Hannah needed help leaving her marriage, her grandmother called me. I helped her move, and we've been together ever since. We think her ex was responsible for my lawyer's death and the fire at his office." "Do Lena and Nina know you're onto them?" Sophia asked. "Not yet," I said, glancing toward Nina's car. "But they'll find out soon enough once they start making their moves." At that moment, Nina approached us, her expression tight with tension. "Luke," she said, her voice clipped, "I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us. The district attorney plans to charge Lena within 48 hours. She continued, her tone desperate. "Unfortunately," I replied evenly, "my attorney says we can't do that." Lena filed a new divorce petition claiming desertion, child abandonment, and back child support. Until the court rules on her claims, nothing can change. "You can't do that," Nina protested, her voice rising. "How are we supposed to bail her out if everything is frozen?" I shrugged, feigning indifference. "Maybe your father could put his house up as collateral. After all, you're both his daughters." Nina's face darkened, and she spun around, muttering under her breath as she stalked off. Sophia watched her go, then said quietly, "Their father wants nothing to do with them. Not since he found out about John's real parentage. He says they're just like their mother." That brought a small smile to my face. Finished with the conversation, I climbed into the U-Haul and headed to Mabel's house, stopping along the way to pick up packing supplies. 3 hours later, I carefully backed the truck into the driveway, using the mirrors to park close to the garage. As I stepped outside, I locked the truck and approached the house. Something felt off. Mabel had mentioned leaving the curtains open, but now they were drawn. My instincts flared, and I quickly texted Mark to ask if the police had closed them. His reply was immediate. No officers have been by today. Feeling cautious, I stepped into the house after unlocking the door. A police officer was waiting inside and immediately handed me a phone. "Mark Collins wants to speak with you," he said. "Mark," I greeted. "I'd like the right people to know I'm here. Nina confronted me at the barbecue place earlier, asking me to lift the lien on Lena's assets. I refused." "We expected that," Mark replied. His voice was calm but purposeful. "We've been recording Lena and Nina discussing their plans. Hannah's ex, Brad Stone, has come up several times. Lena instructed Nina to inform Brad that you know where Hannah is. That should provoke him into making a move." "So your hunch was right?" I asked. "Dead on," Mark confirmed. "Brad showed up within an hour of learning you were back. Lena told him you were staying at Mabel's house. He'll act soon." As Mark explained the situation, I started unloading cardboard boxes from the truck, setting them in the house to begin packing. Around 6:30 p.m., a delivery driver arrived with pizza from Papa John's. When he asked if I was moving, I replied casually, "No, just helping a friend." Later that night, just before 11 p.m., Brad made his move. Armed with a tire iron, he picked the front door lock and crept inside. Seeing the kitchen light on, he drew a pistol from under his shirt and moved toward it. There I was, sitting at the table, sipping coffee as though I'd been expecting him. "Hey Luke," Brad said, his grin menacing. "Lena and Nina send their regards. Now, how about you tell me where Hannah is?" I set my coffee down slowly, keeping my tone calm. "Sorry, Brad. I'm not about to tell my lawyer's killer, or the guy who burned his office. Anything." Brad's smirk faltered, but he held his ground. "What makes you think I did that?" he asked, taking the bait. "Because you're exactly the kind of guy they manipulate into doing their dirty work," I replied smoothly. "So tell me, how much of the $4 million accidental death payout did they promise you?" "4 million. Brad's face went pale. "They told me it was $750,000. Couldn't help but chuckle. "Did you know John isn't even Lena's child? He's Nina's son from her first marriage. They've been using and manipulating people for years, Brad, including you. Do you really think they have your best interests at heart?" Brad's expression shifted, realization dawning as he absorbed my words. "I'm screwed either way," he muttered. "You're right about that," I said, leaning back in my chair. "The fact that my lawyer's car accidentally hit a tree at 70 miles per hour makes this manslaughter. And when the truth comes out, you're just another expendable pawn in their game." Brad stared at me, visibly shaken as the weight of his situation sank in. "Manslaughter would ruin me," he muttered, his voice heavy with regret. "You'd be looking at 5 to 10 years for manslaughter," I replied evenly. But as the handyman finished installing the sturdier lock on the front door, I spotted Emma pulling into the driveway. Her car barely stopped before she jumped out, her expression intense. A mix of relief, urgency, and something else I couldn't quite place. "What's going on?" I asked as she approached. Emma stopped in front of me, her voice low but firm. "Dad, everything's moving fast. Mark called me late last night. You're not going to believe this," Brad confessed. "Everything. The fire, the lawyer's death, the insurance scam. He's agreed to testify." I exhaled sharply, a mix of victory and unease settling in my chest. "So it's happening." Emma nodded, her tone grave. "Mark said the DA is prepping the case as we speak. If Brad sticks to his statement, Mom and Nina are done. But there's more." I narrowed my eyes. "What now?" "Hannah's flying out to join me," Emma continued, glancing over her shoulder like someone might be listening. "Mabel's watching the kids. We think Nina's next move might be desperate, and we need to be ready." "She's going to try something," I said, my voice tight. "That's her pattern. She panics and lashes out when she loses control. That's what we're afraid of," Emma agreed. "Mark is already at the station, securing Brad's statement. But Dad, he said something last night that stuck with me. You're not just a witness in all this, you're still a target." I clenched my jaw, suppressing a bitter laugh. That's not exactly news, Emma. But they've made one mistake. This time, I'm ready for them. Emma's gaze softened, but her worry was still clear. Mark told me what you said to Brad. How you turned him against them. Dad, that was risky. You could have been killed. I shrugged, trying to lighten the mood. If I were a boxer, I'd call it a calculated jab. Emma didn't smile. Calculated or not, you need to be careful. Brad might be in custody, but Mom and Nina aren't yet. And desperate people are the most dangerous, I finished. I know. We stood in silence for a moment before Emma spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not alone in this, Dad. We're all here now. Whatever happens next, we're in it together. I placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently. Thanks, Emma. But make sure you and Hannah stay sharp. This is far from over. She nodded and headed back to her car, glancing at me one last time before driving off. The house felt eerily quiet once she was gone. I locked the door, double-checking the new bolts, and moved into the living room. My coffee sat untouched on the table, the steam long gone. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Brad's confession was a game-changer, but it also raised the stakes. Lena and Nina would know the walls were closing in. If they thought they could turn the tide by silencing me or anyone else, they wouldn't hesitate. I sat on the couch, my eyes scanning the room out of habit, looking for anything out of place. The curtains were drawn tight, the locks secure, but the unease in my gut wouldn't fade. They were out there, watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Let them come. As soon as Hannah pulled into the driveway and saw me, she jumped out of the car and ran straight to me, tears streaming down her face. I held her tightly, feeling the weight of everything she'd been through. Brad turned himself in last night, I said softly. He surrendered to the police. I was never in any real danger. Hannah pulled back slightly, her tearful eyes locking onto mine. If that's true, why didn't you call me? Why did I have to hear about it from Emma? It was almost 2 a.m. when the police cleared out, I admitted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I planned to call you first thing today. Wrapping my arm around her, I pulled her close again. I promise, Hannah, I'll never put myself in that kind of danger again. Once the repairman finished with the door, we locked up, put away Hannah's luggage, and headed to my brother's restaurant for breakfast. When we arrived, we were greeted by Grace, Sophia, and, unexpectedly, my parents. Sam's staff had to rearrange tables to seat everyone, but they didn't seem to mind. The family welcomed Hannah warmly, and breakfast was exceptional as always. Sam was so excited about everything going on that we practically inhaled the food. My parents were thrilled to learn about our sons, Carson and Hunter, who were named after my grandfathers. They eagerly flipped through the photos of our little family that Hannah had saved on her phone. The atmosphere was electric with energy and laughter as my daughters shared stories about how they found me with Mabel and everything they'd learned since reconnecting with me. Years of separation melted away in the warmth of the moment. Mark arrived later, looking tired but determined. As he approached the table, the room quieted. Lena and Nina are in custody now, he announced. Brad has confessed to everything, including his original plan to eliminate his father. He's going to be charged with arson and manslaughter once he testifies in court. Lena and Nina, on the other hand, are facing 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit liquidation, and multiple fraud charges. Hannah gasped, gripping my hand tightly as Mark continued. The district attorney has already met with the divorce judge. He's petitioning to expedite finalizing Luke's divorce. Hannah's voice caught with emotion as she asked, "Are you saying Luke and I can finally get married?" Mark nodded, smiling. The DA took Luke's original divorce documents to the judge. The hope is that the judge will waive Lena's signature requirement and the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate. I turned to Hannah, a grin spreading across my face. I think it's time I buy you a proper engagement ring and finally propose. The room erupted in cheers, murmurs, and warm smiles. Tears welled up in Hannah's eyes. Although she had always believed we would eventually marry, this moment felt surreal. Before we left, my parents made us promise to come over for dinner soon. The joy in their faces was contagious, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for how far we'd all come. Hannah and I spent the rest of the afternoon packing up Mabel's house. The hours flew by as we worked side by side, sharing laughs and talking about the future. By 5:30 p.m., the house was nearly ready to go, but we knew the storm wasn't over yet. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, I glanced at Hannah, her face glowing in the fading light. Despite the chaos swirling around us, for the first time in years, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. After finishing up at Mabel's house, we headed over to my parents' place for dinner. The moment we arrived, Mom and Dad started asking a flurry of questions, eager to learn everything they could about Hannah. As we ate, Hannah shared the story of how I had helped her escape her failed marriage, giving full credit to her grandmother for bringing us together. She recounted how she landed her first job after moving and how that path had eventually led her to where we were now. The warmth of family and love filled the room as we talked about our journey and prepared for the next chapter of our lives. We were still basking in the comfort of family when Mark and Emma walked in, holding something that immediately caught my attention. It was the divorce certificate. After all these years, I was officially free. A weight I hadn't dared to fully acknowledge was suddenly lifted. The relief was overwhelming, and I couldn't stop the small smile that crept onto my face. While Hannah chatted with my mother, proudly sharing stories about our children and the life we'd built together, my mom cleared her throat and made an announcement. "You two should have a wedding before heading back," she said with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "There's no reason to wait." My father, ever one to seize an opportunity, grabbed Mark and me, handing each of us a glass of fresh beer. "Let's talk," he said, steering us toward the den. It was the only way to escape the lively chatter in the living room. Once we were inside, Dad's tone shifted. When word got out that Nina was arrested, the calls started pouring in, he began. "People are coming forward with all sorts of information. Turns out we've only been scratching the surface of what Nina and Lena have been involved in. Half the DA staff is now tied up sorting through the mess. Any idea what happens to Noah, Lena's common-law husband?" I asked, more curious than concerned. Mark shook his head. "Nothing connects him directly to the twins' crimes, so he's safe legally. But disgraced and disarmed, he's almost certain to be stuck raising their kids. Which, let's be honest, might be punishment enough. Aunt Mabel's been told everything, right?" Emma asked. Before anyone could answer, we heard a voice call out playfully from the living room. It was Hannah's dad. "By the way, Hannah wears a size 6.5 ring, in case anyone's curious." Mark and I exchanged amused glances. "Let's go," he said. A few minutes later, Mark and I were at the mall. While he picked out a gift for Emma, I chose a stunning 3-ring engagement set that I knew Hannah would love. It was elegant, timeless, and perfect. When we returned to the house, no one even noticed we'd slipped out. Later, as I was on the phone with Mabel catching her up on the day's events, Grace arrived with her boyfriend, making the house feel even more packed. The men hauled chairs in from the kitchen to accommodate everyone, and we all crammed into the living room. My dad made a point of telling Hannah to sit in his chair, which immediately tipped my mom off that something was up. She watched the scene unfold with laser focus, her suspicions growing. As the room settled, I stood up, heart pounding in my chest. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to Hannah and knelt in front of her. The room fell silent. "Hannah," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me, "will you do me the honor of legally becoming my wife?" She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Hannah was completely caught off guard by my proposal. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she was speechless. Then, a radiant smile broke through her tears, and she whispered, "Yes." Her voice carried so much emotion that it was like the air in the room shifted. Cheers erupted around us, echoing off the walls, and in that instant, the years of chaos and pain seemed to dissolve. My father, always ready to seize a moment, raised his glass high. "I've got almost 7 years of drinking to catch up on with my son," he declared with a grin. "Hannah and Luke, Your engagement is the best excuse to start. The rest of the night was a blur of celebration, laughter, and hugs. Mark ended up driving us back to Mabel's house late that night, both of us finally feeling the weight of stress and worry melt away. By morning, we were at City Hall, picking up our marriage license. While we were there, Hannah discovered Emma's wedding dress fit her perfectly, saving us from the headache of finding another one on such short notice. Sam volunteered without hesitation to be my best man, and Grace proudly stepped up as Hannah's maid of honor. Even the district attorney offered to officiate the ceremony, a surprising but meaningful addition to our plans. Of course, Hannah had a condition. "You are not marrying me in blue jeans," she said firmly. So, I let her drag me to Macy's, where I found a suit that passed her scrutiny. "Now you look like a groom," she teased, straightening the lapel. Sunday afternoon arrived in a whirlwind of activity. Family and friends filled my parents' backyard, and the energy in the air was electric. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. As we exchanged vows, the past felt like it was truly behind us. Even the twins' father showed up, standing off to the side. Despite everything that had happened, there was a quiet respect in his presence, a recognition of the new chapter we were starting. After the ceremony, he approached me with an envelope in his hand. "Philip, this isn't a wedding gift," he said, his voice calm but weighty. "It's an early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." I nodded, sliding the envelope into my pocket without opening it. The day wasn't about money. It was about something far more valuable: freedom, family, and the life we were finally building. As the reception continued, family members recorded videos of the ceremony and sent them to Aunt Mabel, ensuring she felt part of the day. During dinner, someone asked Hannah where we'd be going for our honeymoon. Without hesitation, she answered, "After everything we've been through, once Grandma is settled in her new house, we're spending a week in Florida and another in California. We're taking the kids to Disney, because without family we wouldn't be here today." Her words were met with applause, laughter, and a few tears. The next morning, as we packed up and prepared to leave, I handed Hannah an envelope I'd been holding on to. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000, along with a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for helping to fix karma. I've always believed the twins liquidated their own mother. Watching them get the justice they deserve will be satisfying. For me and for my granddaughters." Hannah's hands trembled as she read the note. She didn't say a word but slipped it into her purse, her expression a mixture of quiet determination and understanding. After one last round of hugs and goodbyes, we climbed into the U-Haul. As I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, the gravity of the past began to lift. The road ahead was open, and for the first time in years, the future felt free of shadows. This was the beginning of something new, something we had earned through every battle, every loss, and every hard-fought moment of survival. We were finally free.